I am ready, yes.
Awesome. Okay, so I'd like to welcome everyone to Not Just Playing an Inquiry in the Early Years with Joel Seaman. It's always great to have people from all over Ontario joining us for these OTF Connect sessions. And we're just going to have a wonderful evening learning together and working with Joel as we talk about playing an inquiry in the early years. So over to you, Joel.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for coming tonight. I'm very excited to have you all here. This is my third time doing a webinar for OTF, and each one so far has been such a great experience, lots of fun, and lots of learning for all of us. Before we get started, I do want to introduce myself, just to provide a little bit of context for the things you're going to see and hear tonight. So as you've heard, my name is Joel Seaman, and I'm a kindergarten teacher with the Toronto District School Board. I've been teaching with the board for 6 years, and I have been lucky enough to have been in kindergarten for all of that time. And I say lucky enough because I truly, truly, truly love kindergarten. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir because we are a kindergarten early years crowd, but it's just such a fun age group and grade to teach. There's so many fabulous things going on every day. I do teach, and you'll see some photos of our outdoor space. I teach at a school on Toronto Island, so it's a bit of a unique location. We do take a boat to and from work every day. A few of our students live on the island, but the majority of them live downtown in condos, and we do have the pleasure and adventure of taking a boat across Lake Ontario every day. Tonight we're going to be talking about play and inquiry in the early years, which is certainly, as I'm sure you know, a huge idea. I could spend hours talking about it, but I promise I won't. We are going to skim the surface and talk about a few different important aspects to play and inquiry in our programs. But I do like to start off every presentation I ever give with the knowledge that I'm not an expert on this topic. And in fact, I firmly believe there is no such thing as an expert on this topic. I think, you know, we're all still learning. I'm simply going to be telling you tonight what has worked for me in my practice. But I recognize that we are a room tonight full of knowledge and experience. And it is my hope that we get to hear from all of you tonight. I think this is going to be a more meaningful session if it's not just my voice for an hour and a half, but we really engage in some dialogue. So as you've heard, there is the chat window at the bottom of our screens. If anyone feels brave and wants to turn on their microphone, for sure, go for it. But the chat window is something I kind of keep my eye on. If there's anything you want to add to the conversation there, can everyone just give me a little hello there so I know you can hear me? Hi, Laura. Hi, Kathy. Hi, Paula. Oh, wow, look at it. They're all coming in now. Hi, everybody. Thank you again for coming. So please feel free to take part in the chat throughout the night. Like I said, I'm looking forward to hearing from you and learning from you as well, because that's how these things tend to go. It's a little more interesting that way. I'm going to flip ahead to the next slide. I like to start anything I do with a minds-on quote to kind of get our thinking focused for the night. And this one comes to us from the Canadian Council on Learning. And they say, play nourishes every aspect of children's development. Play develops the foundation of intellectual, social, physical, and emotional skills necessary for success in school and in life. It paves the way for learning. And I would actually say not only just paves the way for learning, but is learning. You know, for me, it's this whole idea that in kindergarten, when we talk about play, play doesn't have to be a bad word. You know, sometimes for those of us who teach in kindergarten, you know that other people look in your room and they say, oh, the kids are just playing. You know, and as I titled tonight's session, I thought about that. You know, it's not just playing. There's so much more, as this quote shows us, and hopefully the stuff that we're going to look at tonight, as it illustrates, play is so rich in the early years. It's not just a mindless activity, but it's really how our young students are learning and how they demonstrate their knowledge. A quick outline for our learning tonight is we're going to look at a little minds-on video clip. We're going to talk about play-based learning in action, what it looks like in our spaces, and a bit about how learning environments can invite and support play. We're going to quickly look at our role as educators in the play, And towards the end of our session, we're going to look at the idea of pedagogical documentation. How do we notice and name the learning that occurs in play, and the possibilities of play as we shift towards an inquiry stance. Towards the end, there will be resources I share, and there will be time for questions, but please feel free to chime in throughout the night if the mood strikes you. As a mind's on, we're going to take a look at a video clip of a student in our classroom engaged in play. The video isn't actually embedded in this player, but it's been loaded onto YouTube. So Mally will paste the link into our chat window, and once it comes up, you can click on that link. It'll take you off to YouTube, and you can take a look at this video clip. And once you've watched it once, I want you to return to our presentation, and I want you to use the text tool, which is the fourth one down, and on the screen type what words came to mind as you watched this child at play. It's not an assessment, it's not full TED Talk. I just want you to look at the video clip and just what words come into your mind as you're watching this child at play. And the link is now posted in the chat, so you can click on that, come on back once you've viewed the clip, and you can let us know what words came to mind. So as we finish up the video, you can make your way back to the presentation, and using the text tool, which is the fourth one down, or in the chat if you prefer, just let us know what words came to mind as you watch that child at play, and we'll take a look at what we see. Awesome. There's some great stuff here. So in the chat window, people are mentioning discovery and planning. There's certainly a lot of thought that's going into it. So they focus, Vanessa, determination, nice. Innovating, yeah, that brings us right back to the kindergarten program. Yeah, I like that someone on the screen here noticed that the child is actually singing. They're definitely having fun. It's a positive, joyful experience. Yeah, it's noticed down here too. Yeah, a lot of mention of this exploration of sinking or floating, and this idea that through his play, he's investigating these concepts. Taking chances, trying new things. The idea of a growth mindset, for sure. That definitely comes through in this clip. So what this is showing us, with the amount of positive words that are on the screen and in the chat, is that we understand that this is not just playing. On the surface it may look like that, but underneath there's this problem solving, this experimenting, these thoughtful pieces happening in the play when we really stop to notice. So as I thought about words to me that kind of summed up the idea of play in our kindergarten program, I thought about play being purposeful and intentional. Play is layered. Play can get messy, as we'll see. Play is natural. It's not, something that kids have to learn. This is how they are. This is how they make their knowledge. Play is fun. Play is cross-curricular, and play is vital. And when we're playing, we're exploring, we're negotiating, we're testing and creating. We may be pretending or representing. There's an element of constructing and refining our thinking. So play is really this big idea that makes the way for all this learning. I've pulled 3 quotes from the front matter of our new 2016 Ontario Kindergarten program. And if you've heard me present before, you know that I am just the biggest fan of this kindergarten program. I think it's such a fantastic document. And when I present in person, I make a point of bringing it with me. And I also bring our old curriculum document with us. And I hold them up side by side because if you've seen the two, you know that the first thing that will strike you is our new program is significantly thicker than the last. It's almost, I think, probably 4 or 5 times as thick as our last one was. And I really like that. To me, that's a positive. And to me, it's that front matter part that really shows that what we're doing, play-based learning, isn't just because. It's not because it's fun or easy. It's because there's a great deal of research, which is now part of our program, that supports play-based learning as the optimal way for students to learn in our early childhood settings. I'm not going to read through each quote, but you can take a look. It's been neat as well. I do a lot of tweeting. I engage with educators around the world on Twitter, and often I'll tweet pieces from our program. And I'll have educators from other countries ask, oh, that looks like a great resource, looks like a great document. Where is it from? And I get to say, it's the Ontario Kindergarten Program. Thanks, Molly. I see you've posted the link in the program or in the chat window there. So if people are interested in clicking on it, it's there for you to see. These are the 3 pieces I've pulled that really summarize our thinking tonight on the idea of not just playing, but really the benefits of a play-based learning environment. I'll give you some time to read through them. If people feel ready to move on, you can use the green check mark to let me know you're ready, or the red X if you need a little bit more time. I just want to make sure that everyone's got a chance to take a look before we move on. Awesome. I am going to flip to the next slide then, which we've got a few images here. I just wanted to include some visuals of our young students at play. And when we look at play-based learning in action in our classrooms, we're reminded that play is intentional. I also like the term purposeful play. It's this idea that, even though, again, it may look on the surface like just playing, there's a great deal of thought that goes into the process. And, thought on both the part of the educators and the students involved. So when I think about play-based learning in action, I think about the cycle of first observing our students. And when we do this, we listen carefully. We think about what we notice. What are the students talking about? What might they be doing? What are they representing in their play? What are they interested in? And what do they wonder about? And this guides us. We then use these interests to design and plan play-based learning opportunities. And this is different than the traditional kindergarten approach, which once upon a time was theme learning. We tend to take an inquiry stance, and there's going to be more on that towards the end of tonight's presentation. So with this in mind, we then set up provocations or invitations to invite students to construct their knowledge, their skills, and their understanding through hands-on, open-ended exploration. It's that idea that I love of constructivism, that students construct their knowledge through what they do. Learning is active. Learning is not a worksheet. We continue observing as our students play and they interact in these experiences. And then we think about how we can capture the learning. That's the PedDoc piece, which will come up again later tonight. And how we can extend what we see. It's this idea that it's a cycle. I love this image. This is actually just from about a month ago in our space. Our students have been really interested in creating caves. It actually came, I noticed our group this year was time and time again interested in creating enclosed spaces. They would go under tables and they would bring over blankets and pillows from other areas of our classroom and kind of create these small spaces. And rather than shut it down, because it was a recurring interest, I talked to them about it, and what emerged was they loved this idea of kind of being enclosed. So from there we extended it into a research study on caves, and they did all sorts of research. They built models and plans and blueprints. They collected materials. You can see there in the background that the black fabric, that's the entrance to their cave, and you can go with it. It's the whole thing, but the student used the cardboard box to create a bear. And I just think it's a nice piece on where play can take us. Some patterning as well. We're going to talk later on how the learning emerges and makes itself present in play. I wanted to think tonight a little bit about how we can create physical space that supports and invites play. So I wanted to show you a few images from our space and perhaps hear from some of you on things you found successful in creating physical environments to invite play. Something I try to think about as much as I can, and I will be very honest with you, this is something I've had to work towards and have really understood more recently on my teaching journey. I wasn't always this way, but the idea that we are trying to create spaces that are perhaps free of clutter, that are open and leave space for the students and their play. I tell the story of when I started teaching. I had a shelf, much like this one here, but instead of 8 compartments, oh gosh, I think it had probably 36 compartments. And I put a jar of manipulatives in every single space. And I thought it was beautiful. I took my picture. But when the kids came in, time and time again, they would just dump everything out. And I wondered, well, why are they doing this? And, as I looked closer, it became apparent to me that it was just overwhelming. There was simply too much out. So I'm really purposeful with what I put out. I try to make sure it's not too much at any given time. I think that invites a little more thought on the students' part on how they're going to use these materials, but also thought on my part as one of the educators in the room is if I'm only going to have a limited number of materials out, what am I going to put out and how am I going to cycle it through as the year goes on? Because if there's limited materials, I need to, update them, which doesn't always happen. Andrea, yeah, as well, and I don't want to claim to have always known this. I used to have a lot more clutter, but I've worked really hard on cutting it back, and for me, it's been successful for our students. As you'll see in this image as well, it's a lot of open-ended materials rather than traditional toys, and for me, I find that the open-ended materials encourage a little more creativity on the students' part. A great question, Sharon. We are lucky enough that we do have a storage room off of our kindergarten classroom. I know that's not the case in all classrooms, but we can get creative with our storage as well. In the past, I've had things under that bench here, but I've moved it all back into the back room for now. Patricia, do I find that open spaces lead to children running in the classroom? Not often, because although the space is open, we also think carefully about our pathways. So what I mean by that is if we were to map the classroom, there's not any kind of long stretches of open space from one end to the other. The centers aren't all in a row. They're kind of staggered a little bit more around a central area so that in terms of pathways, it doesn't invite that running. We're going to flip through and take a look at more of our physical space as we think about how it can invite play. I try as much as I can to have a space that invites wonder and curiosity, a space that feels warm and welcoming. You can see in these images I'm fond of bringing real plants into the classroom and as much as I can using the natural light as well as natural materials such as wood or glass and cork. Around the room there's various spaces for our students to engage in play. In this image, you see a building carpet, our block area, as well as our art studio with a gallery wall behind to display their art. And these are areas that I think encourage play that is both creative and social. Also in our space, we have a place for writing. There's often guided teacher groups there, but students also are able to explore. Everyone has their own writing journal, so they can bring that literacy piece into their play. There's a quiet corner, an area for self-regulation, for calming our bodies down, for spending some alone time. As I've said at the space, I think about areas for solitary play as well, because I think while play is inherently social, it is important rather to remember that depending on their stage of development, many of our students are still engaged in parallel play or maybe more interested in spending time by themselves. So we have a book area with some comfy cushions, carpets that kind of mimic the grass outside. And this is new this year. I've created a Lego building wall. I actually just hot glued these Lego base plates to the side of a shelf to kind of invite a new way of building and a space for students to kind of work alone or in a smaller group. It's definitely changed the dynamics, which has been interesting to see. And it's also, just a way to use the space for those of us who are in smaller spaces. We can look at going vertical. I'm just noticing some questions in the chat. I'm going to take a peek at Patricia. Yeah, the students do bring materials from any space around the room, with the piece that we like them to return them where they came from, and that's something that we kind of build and model throughout the year. But no, we're pretty flexible with our material so that they do move around the room. Speaking of materials, we have a fair amount of loose parts. So we have some areas for loose parts. We have a light table. And again, these open-ended materials just encourage a little more creativity than you may get with a traditional toy where there's a very clear idea that, you know, this car is a car. Whereas with this, maybe students will make it into a car. Maybe one student will make their name. Maybe one student will pattern or count. There's a lot of opportunities for loose parts, you know, to connect to literacy and mathematics behaviors as well. These images are of our science area. The science area, as much as we can, we bring in natural materials and we encourage students to make observations. We invite them to form theories. I chose this image for our math area because often the math play becomes game. So here a student actually created his own game called Whoever Gets the Most Wooden Pieces Wins. And I photographed every step and we made a little rule book of it, and he invited students to come play his game with him, which was a nice way to get that math behavior in a play-based environment. I couldn't talk to you about play and not mention the role of the outdoors. I firmly believe that the outdoors are just such a natural place for play. You know, you never have to tell students, oh, go play. Once you're outside, you know, naturally they play. So as much as I can, we try to get outside. I also, as I show you these images, want to be very clear that although we are on Toronto Island and we have a beach, I recognize that's not the case for everyone. I don't want to be naive. I know that some of us have to get a little more creative with our outdoor spaces, but I think why I want to talk about this tonight is that for those of us who maybe don't have as big or as interesting outdoor spaces, it's all the more reason to really advocate to our admin that, you know, outdoor play is so vital to children's development. And yeah, Paul, as we go to the water. I mean, if it's wavy, of course, we stay further back, but we spend a great amount of time in September and October talking about safety during outdoor play, and the students really, they do a great job with it. Some more green space. We have a lighthouse we love to visit. I love that image. And again, more beach time. So I invite you to really think about the role that outdoors may play in our play-based learning. As we move beyond the physical environment, we can think as well about our role in play. So as educators, what role do we have in this? Because play, when we think about that, it's our students that are engaged, but we are there as, well, as you'll see, in a variety of ways. This list that I'm showing you now, I quite like, and it comes from a resource that we'll link in the resource page at the end, and it's called The Play's the Thing. And it's a nice short resource, a short little book that's all about a teacher's role in education, in play. So a few of the ones that they list are the stage manager, the mediator, we do that a lot, player, I like that one, and I think sometimes we forget that we can engage in the play too. And these bottom four, the scribe, the assessor, the communicator, the planner, when I look at those, I think very much about the idea of documentation, which we're going to shift to in a second. But I thought maybe before we move on, we could use the clip art to maybe choose one of the common symbols and place it beside the role that you feel comes most naturally to you in play. Interesting. So lots towards the bottom, which is that PED doc piece. player, yeah, I mean, that's the one that I find I sometimes forget about. So it's interesting to think about. And I think the students respond really well when they see an adult playing as well. Nice. We're going to spend some time tonight thinking about pedagogical documentation and specifically the role it plays in play-based learning. So I know, again, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir, we know the value of play-based learning. But this allows us to share it with others, and that can be the other children, certainly the families of our students, and also other staff in the school who may not have taught in a play-based approach before. I think of it very much as telling the story of learning. So when we think about the early years, we know that students often represent their knowledge and understanding through what they do or what they say, what they represent in their play. There's not always a written artifact, like in an older grade when you sit down and write an essay to show your knowledge. For kindergartens, these moments happen in their play. And I find that if we don't work on capturing these moments or noticing and naming the learning in these moments become fleeting. In a lot of ways, too, I really like to think about PedDoc as a form of advocacy for play-based learning. We know that play-based learning works, but when we work on our PedDoc and we share that with others, it hopefully opens their eyes to the great deal of learning that happens in play and prevents those comments that I mentioned earlier of, oh, they're just playing. I wanted to start our PedDoc piece of tonight's presentation with this image. It's a collage I threw together. We use an app called Pick Collage on our classroom iPods. It's free and it's quite easy to use. And I wanted to show that it's more than just playing. We had a day at the beach, and as I watched students engaging in their play, I noticed that there was learning from all parts of our program happening. So you can see up top students engaging in gross motor exploration. There's creative art as they create sculptures in the sand. There's verbal communication as two friends kind of just sit and have a chat. There's building in the sand. This student here in the middle is actually writing. She was tracing her name, letters in the sand. There's lots of physical activity. There's a student doing a headstand. Towards the bottom, you see some science or some problem solving and innovation. As they were engaging in kind of a sinking and floating exercise as they were throwing things in. That's a great point, Elizabeth. I really like the way you summed that up. To me, I think the benefit is for all of those parties involved. Certainly it benefits the students as well as the educator. As you said, it allows us to plan and support, and definitely the families and colleagues. I like how you say to explain the richness of the program. I think that's a really nice succinct way of saying it, and remembering that this PedDoc piece benefits all the parties involved. Thanks so much. As we kind of dig more and more into the kindergarten program too, we're reminded that the PedDoc piece is more than just capturing. We have to take it a step further, and I like this. This is very much what you were saying, Elizabeth. And Laura as well, this is fantastic. It's this idea that we look at what we collect in our documentation and we analyze it. We can use it for assessment, certainly as we're writing the communication of learning document. We can also use what emerges or what we capture as we plan for further learning. So it's very much an important cycle that I think is really crucial in a play-based learning environment. We're going to take a look at some of the various ways that I've used to document and hopefully hear from some of you as well. The first I wanted to mention, and you've seen it a lot already in tonight's presentation, is the idea of using photographs. So photographs to me, they're quick, they're easy, they kind of can happen in the moment and don't require too much from us. And I like photographs too because they can allow for interpretation as we go back and look at an image later. And what's nice about this is we can use multiple lenses. So, perhaps you and your educator partner will look at the same image and both notice or wonder different things, or prompts I like as we look at photographs of students learning, or what do you see? What do you notice? What do you wonder? And this is actually a process we're going to engage in together later tonight. Yeah, I love that, Paula, the idea that the students are viewing their photos. There's that metacognition piece, that they're thinking about their own learning, and they're celebrating all the great things we do every day. And Elizabeth raises a really good point in the chat, that as great as the digital documentation is, and I certainly agree, I love it, that the face-to-face time is important as well. It's nice to kind of connect with a parent or a family whenever you can, face-to-face, and let them know verbally what's going on in the classroom. But it's certainly a challenge to find that time. As we look at photographs too, I also think about adding the additional layer, which I think, Patricia, thanks, you're getting right to it in the chat, that's awesome. When we add the student voice, and for me this is so important, it adds, like I said, an additional layer that kind of reveals a little bit more about what students are thinking in the moment when that photograph was captured of that play-based experience. And like Patricia said, the direct quotes are so rich and meaningful to include on that communication of learning. So the student voice piece is something we try to layer on top of our photographs as much as possible. I also do want to say straight up that I know the student voice piece can be very time consuming. You know, you see here that I've documented an entire conversation. That's a lot to do, which then leads us to video clips. So for me, this has become one of my favorite ways to document, because as we go back and think about that idea of student voice, I often found that I would be kind of, you know, whether I was using the iPad or even a clipboard and pencil, I would be glued to that and kind of just so quickly and furiously writing everything down I could, and I would realize I'm not even looking this child in the eye as they're speaking to me, which to me is so important. So I found that getting too caught up on capturing student voice in the moment really prevented me from being present, and it just took a lot of time. So as I've shifted towards video, it's been really meaningful because it allows us to be a little more present. We can hit the button on our digital device, capture a video clip, and we can revisit that clip later out of the moment to look at what students are doing and saying. So for me, this has been a huge time saver, and has been something that I really am trying to do in my practice. And what's great too, and we're going to get to this as we talk about student-led documentation, is the students can also make their own videos of their learning. So you see here on the left, we have a student who's, they created actually their own 100 chart. We had one up and it fell down and some of the pieces got lost. And this child actually worked quite hard with a few friends to create all the numbers again. And here he is capturing his own learning with an iPad. This image in the middle, I don't even know one of the students took it because I'm in it, but you know, they have access to the iPads as well. And over here on the right, we have, again, in Pic Collage, the student actually adding their own text. So I'm not going in and adding their voice. They're actually doing it through typing. Yeah, Andrea, great point. The video clips do definitely take up a lot, and I'm certainly guilty of always having storage full, so I try to delete them as much as I can once I've transcribed them. But I also use Dropbox and more recently, actually, Google Photos to upload a lot of things online. Google Drive, yes, thank you, Sharon. So this here on the right, earlier this year, the students built a bakery in our classroom. We had Play-Doh, and they were really interested in making cookies. So they created this bakery, and we challenged them. They told us we need a mixer. I said, well, how could we make a mixer? So here we've had a student use our MSI materials. He labeled it. This part here is the mixer. This is the bowl, and he let us know who made it. So what's nice about the student-led documentation piece is, well, to me, it's twofold. We've already talked a little bit tonight about how documentation, especially capturing student voice, can be super time consuming. But when students take the lead on capturing documentation of their own learning, it frees up our time. No longer are we trying to capture everything that's happening around the room all on our own, but now the students are taking an active lead in spending time and energy on documenting their learning. And it really provides us with such a rich source of knowledge at the end of the day. But also I really like it as well because as I'm sure you know, it creates such a sense of pride and ownership over their learning when students are capturing their own learning and really taking part in that process. I find that it really helps to build pride and ownership. This is a piece of student-created documentation that we have still in our room. We actually keep it at our book area, and the students will revisit it, and it often will spark further play. So the students were bringing in toy cars from home, and I just noticed that over and over again, they were kind of just racing their toy cars off the edge of a table. And I thought, okay, this is what they're interested in, but when we look at play-based learning, it's, well, how can I extend this? How can I facilitate something a little further with this interest in toy cars from home? So really, it was a simple solution. All it took was giving them a roll of tape and some markers, and they ended up creating, as they called it, the town of tape. So it was created on a tabletop, and they built roads, and you can see in that first image there's some arrows that kind of indicate which way you could drive, but to me that shows a lot of spatial sense and spatial reasoning and mathematics thinking. As well as it kind of ballooned into a larger project, they added signs and parking lots. So there was a lot of literacy coming out as well. And as I captured this in documentation, I added student voice. They told me here kind of what's the story of the town of tape, where did it come from, what role did it play. Some students drew pictures of it. This was before we did eventually take it apart and move on to a different learning space, but as the interest waned, students captured it in their drawings. We added some more student voice there. So in this picture, people are working on the town of tape, and the town of tape was good. There's arrows and letters and a lot of tape. And like I said, this book lives in our classroom still. So it's a piece of documentation that I think shows the students and the families that their play was valuable and their play was a learning experience. And I think that it really honors that. So as much as you can, I encourage you to involve students in the documentation process. And as well, don't just document and put it up on the wall, but really revisit this documentation. This is actually one of the most popular books on our bookshelf. The students love to look at it. And again, I think it's that pride and ownership piece, because they see themselves represented in it. And they see their play being not just honored, but really celebrated. Lastly, as we look at documentation, I often will have some PedDoc up as we display work. So this was a self-portrait that students did on paper that we actually made in our sensory table. We shredded some paper and we added water, and they made their own paper, but I thought it was important to kind of highlight the process rather than the product there. And documentation, of course, as we look at PedDoc and how we analyze it, allows us to make specific connections to our curriculum outcomes. So this panel here, for example, I want to be clear, I don't do this for every single play experience, but often if I see something that links directly to our program, I will spend a bit of time thinking on how I can represent that. So again, as we look at kind of the advocacy of PedDoc, showing people that, this play, this child here created a kite and actually taped it to his finger, which I thought was a really interesting kind of problem solving and innovation piece. And we can post this on the wall and show people that, look at the amount of learning that's happening in this play. I love to share this image. This comes from a ministry monograph. Again, it'll be shared in our resource slide at the end of the presentation, but it just gives us a few different ways to capture thinking, a few different ideas. We spoke earlier about how, because we are a play-based program, students' thinking is really visible through what they do and what they say, and we have to work to capture this because it's not always represented with the final product. So some of these ideas came up tonight, perhaps some you use in your own practice. I thought it might be a neat activity after thinking about pedagogical documentation and noticing the naming that happens, noticing and naming the learning that happens in play, to kind of engage in this together. So we are going to look at a video clip all together, and then like we did earlier, we'll return to the chat, but this time with more of an idea of what learning do you see happening. So for a bit of context, the video clip you're going to see are students in our classroom. This was last year in our space. And it all started, a student actually asked us, how do you make Play-Doh? Which is such a fabulous question and certainly such kind of a spark for future learning. So he worked one-on-one with my teaching partner at the time to kind of do a bit of research on how do we make Play-Doh? What's the recipe? And as they found it, he then photographed every step, and you can see, well, you see it in the video, there's a book he created where he wrote out every step with the photo. And then this recipe book then lived in our classroom alongside the ingredients, and we invited students to kind of use the recipe book to create their own Play-Doh and start to build knowledge on how Play-Doh is made. So again, we're going to look at this video clip, and this time when you return, I want you to tell us what learning did you notice. So we know it's play-based learning, we know they're playing, but as tonight's big topic is, it's not just playing. What learning do you notice? So thanks, Mally. I see you've posted it in the chat there, so you can go ahead and click on it and return to the chat to share your thinking when you're finished. Thank you. So as we're coming back from the video, I see tons of great thinking already on the screen. Thank you guys for sharing. It's so neat. I was saying to Mally earlier before we started, I used this video clip in a few of my presentations, and it's so neat because no matter how many times I've shown it, people always notice different things. You know, someone will always mention something or have an angle on it that I hadn't thought about before. So it's really, for me, it speaks to the importance of revisiting documentation and certainly the idea of utilizing multiple lenses. You know, we all notice different things, and being in kindergarten, most of us are lucky enough to work with a teaching partner. So we have another adult in the room to analyze and give their perspective. Great ideas. I mean, there's so much going on. This was a minute clip, and I think this shows people that in 1 minute of play, if we really stop and notice, there's a great deal of learning and understanding being represented. You know, certainly here, the idea of collaboration. There's a lot of teamwork. The expression of feelings. I don't know if everyone caught that moment of, could you please, I think he says, could you please take your hands off me? In such a kind and thoughtful way, I think, but he's really expressing how he feels in that moment. Oh yeah, there it is there. Yep, certainly tons of connections here to the mathematics behaviors in our program. There's more, there's less, there's size. The reading, the environmental print certainly comes in. Definitely connections to problem solving. That language of it's goopy, and then adding more flour. Certainly, I agree, kind of reveals an understanding that, you know, when we add this ingredient, it changes the state. I like this here, second from the bottom, listening to others. I always think about what they're saying, but it's neat that you've noticed, yeah, there's a great deal of listening going on here, which is that whole belonging and contributing piece. So I guess, I mean, I think I know how I would answer this question, but I'm curious because as I read the awesome observations that you all are making on the screen here, to me, I see evidence of truly all 4 frames of learning in our kindergarten program. I certainly see belonging and contributing in the way they are working together, sharing their ideas, contributing their thinking to the large discussion. There's a lot of self-regulation and well-being here in the turn-taking and the student who advocates for himself and his needs. As we discussed, there's mathematics and literacy behaviors at play here, and certainly a great deal of problem solving and innovation. And I guess you can show me with when we get to that clip art, with the green check mark, do you see evidence of all 4 frames of learning here? And if we're unsure, we can talk about that in the chat as well. That's amazing. In 1 minute, we've noticed learning from all 4 frames of our program. To me, my big takeaway when I see this is that play-based learning is so valuable. To take us back to our title tonight, they're not just playing. Yes, they are playing, and that's awesome. Like I said, play is not a bad word. Play is incredible. Look at how much learning and understanding and working together is happening in that play. Another question I really like to pose when I look at this video specifically is how would we have robbed the students of this learning if we had stepped in? Because we just discussed a great deal of learning went on in that clip. But I think a lot of it happened because as an educator, as a bystander, as a facilitator, we stepped back. You heard me, I think, I questioned the student at one moment. I give him a prompt to tell me a little bit more, but I've showed this clip to my partner, and when he sees it, he's not a teacher. He can't believe it. When they just start dumping in the flour, he's like, what's going on here? It's chaotic, but I don't want to step in that moment because thinking about constructivism, I know that this is how these students learn. By going through the act of adding more and more and getting their hands in there and seeing what it feels like, this is how students learn. So I really hope that we all walk away from this remembering that sometimes when students play, there is that temptation to step in and redirect. And certainly if it's an issue of safety or respect, we do. But in these moments that, get a little messy, and I said that earlier, play gets messy. And Miss Frizzle for the Magic School Bus, I think she said, take chances, make mistakes, get messy. Sometimes play gets messy. And we step back and we let it happen because there's such a richness of learning that's happening underneath. Sharon, can you tell me, it's an interesting question, can you tell me a little bit more? I just want to be clear what you mean by sabotaging the situation, if you don't mind, in the chat. Thank you. I love that, Paula. Yeah, that's great. Okay, so Sharon's wondering about maybe a student who doesn't have the same end goal in mind. And it's a great question. I mean, to be honest with you, it didn't happen in this process. I think if I were faced with that, I would probably, get down to the child's bubble and talk to them one-on-one and maybe get a little bit more understanding on why those actions are happening, and try to redirect a little bit that way. But I also think, I really think as well that the students would probably self-advocate for themselves in that case. That maybe they would work with that child. Oh, we're not dumping it out now. We're trying to make Play-Doh. Do you want to help? Oh, and I love that in the chat. The balance of knowing when to watch and grow and when to scaffold learning and where to go next with an experience. I love that because it is a balance, and although in this specific Play-Doh example, I did take more of a back seat and allow the students to take their lead on their play, that's not to say that that's always the case. You know, we're not always just stepping back and watching. There are, if you think back to earlier in the presentation, we talked about the various roles we can take. There are times when we are more active in the play, and we take on more of the role of a facilitator or a mediator. So it's definitely, and I'm so glad you pointed that out, a balance between the two. And I think we have to be conscious that it's never one or the other. It really comes down to what's happening at that moment. As we think about this clip as well, we think about the inquiry stance. And we're going to look at an inquiry cycle in a couple of slides, but I wanted to pull this piece from the program because I think it's really important to remember that play and inquiry go hand in hand. You know, when we're listening to these students' interests and wonders, they're then exploring, and it allows the students at the end to share their learning and continue in that cycle. You know, but it's the idea that students learn through experience, not through just being told. So I'm going to flip ahead here with a specific example from my own practice when I felt that play-based learning and inquiry-based learning really went hand in hand and created this journey of learning and play for all the students involved in the inquiry. And our example is the haunted house. So this happened, I believe this was in our program 2 years ago now. And what kind of sparked it was, you can see here, I'm going to flip ahead to that image and I'll go back. But students were really interested in building haunted houses. And it actually was happening, I found, at our quiet corner, which is an area that we encourage students to self-regulate if they need some time to relax. So I questioned these students. I said, you know, out of curiosity, do you think that the quiet corner is maybe the best place for a haunted house to be? And, you know, I didn't shut it down immediately, but, you know, I turned it to them in an inquiry stance, and they did some deep thinking, and they decided they actually wanted to shift their haunted house out of the quiet corner to be respectful to students who needed that space, and they moved it to our dramatic center. I think at the time, the dramatic center was a tap dancing center, and it had kind of phased out, and here they were. So that's kind of the context for what we're going to look at tonight, but I'm going to flip back to this great quote that comes to us from the monograph we're going to get linked to later. And it says, the 4 phases of inquiry are fluid and recursive. For example, as students engage in the exploratory phase, they may return to their initial topic or question and revise it according to new insights or information. Similarly, in the analytic phase, they may discover that they need to return to their research. And when they share their finding and engage in discussion, they may decide to return to the beginning of their inquiry and develop a new question or topic. So I felt it was important to put that in because in the example I'm about to show, I do break it down by the 4 phases, but I just wanted to be very clear that it's not 4 distinct phases that happen kind of in a one after the other order. That is, it's, you know, there's a lot going on at once in an inquiry. I just kind of sussed it out into these 4 phases so we can see them. So that first phase, as we mentioned on the last slide, is focus. So the initial engagement, selecting kind of a focus or a question or a topic. And I like that this image here breaks it down by what students might be doing, but also what we might be doing. Because as it's come up many times tonight, we also have a role in students' play. So during the focus, students may be noticing or wondering, asking questions about a topic of interest. They may be dialoguing about possible ways to learn more. So for me, I looked at this as kind of the focus, this idea that time and time again, students were returning to this interest of creating a haunted house. So you can see this image here is after they moved it over. This is very early in the process. They were bringing over, it looks like about 4 classroom chairs and putting a blanket on top. So to me, it kind of started with this idea of let's make a dark space. It's interesting presenting on this now, knowing that our students this year created a cave, because there are some parallels here I'm seeing as I analyze the play. The second phase is the exploration stage, in which we find out more, in which we investigate. So students might be gathering information, connecting their current thinking to previous knowledge. So for us, I encourage students to do a little research, some thinking, some planning, some brainstorming. And it's funny thinking about the technology we mentioned earlier. Like often when I say to students, let's do research, my thought is let's go to the library and get books. But in this specific project, a student actually said, let's ask Siri. So it's interesting with 21st century learners. We got out the iPads and we asked Siri for some ideas. Students share their own ideas. As I posed the question, what do we need for a haunted house? They had all sorts of ideas. We need ghosts and vampires, spooky music, fire, but they knew it had to be fake fire, which was interesting thinking. Oh, I love this. Stuffy toys for if you're scared. So they're bringing in that emotional and social element, which is so neat to see. The belonging and contributing piece and the self-reg for sure. Fake blood. Snacks for if you get hungry. Our guys are trying to get snacks into everything we do. This is some documentation from a planning session. We sat in a community circle and invited students to share their thinking. I chose this example too because it linked earlier. I want you to know I did not in this moment sit and type this all out. I captured it video on the iPad and I returned to it later. It allowed me to transcribe it and think some more about the conversations that students were having. But I was able to be more present in that moment because I felt like I didn't have to capture everything right then and there. But as you can see, and I'm not going to read through this conversation, but as you glance through, you can see that really students take the lead on this. As educators, we facilitate and we help guide the process. But you know, I always tell educators, if you feel stuck in an inquiry, talk to the students, ask the students, because they will guide us. And they come up with all these fabulous ideas that really help us propel the learning forward. You know, one of my favorite quotes from our new program is that students are competent and capable of complex thinking. And I think that really reveals itself as we look at the inquiry stance and play-based learning. So this was their first attempt. And I say the first attempt because they actually revisit it a lot. And that's why I mentioned that piece earlier, that these 4 parts of the inquiry cycle don't just happen once. We often will move through them and then move back through them. So they pulled a few shelves together and they put some fabric. You can see the streamers hanging down. They were very adamant that they wanted people to crawl underneath that because they thought when it went on your face, it would feel like something was touching you. So that was neat. But again, rather than tell students what I thought, because in the inquiry model it's more, well, what do you think? I asked them to analyze it, and they all agreed it wasn't dark enough. So they had to do a little more thinking on how they could enclose the space a little bit more. And they also wanted to look at designing multiple rooms. So it wasn't just you went in and you were there, but you know, how can we kind of have a tunnel or a hallway? Eventually they started bringing over some of our classroom tables, and you would go under a table and around a corner. So really slowing down the process. You know, when we look at inquiry and when we look at the project approach, it's not about the end goal. It's not about the product. The product is nice and the product is lovely, but it's the process where the learning happens. It's the process where the play and the inquiry is so rich. So, you know, not being afraid of slowing things down. We don't have to rush to the end goal. So they rebuilt it as they analyzed their own work, which then takes us to this stage. I just said it, analyze. So it was summarizing and synthesizing, drawing conclusions, but also constructing new learning. It's that idea that it's not just an end piece. So as they analyzed not only the structure and creation of their own haunted house, we also worked to analyze some of the big ideas behind this learning. Because as cool and fun as it was to make a haunted house, for me it was kind of the question of so what? What's the big idea at play here? What are we really exploring? So it led to some interesting community conversations about the concept of fear and what makes us afraid, or what does being afraid feel like? And the students came up with some really rich and meaningful things. You know, it feels like I'm going to fall down. It's like a cheetah's going to bite you. It feels like you bumped your head. So really thinking about our feelings and our well-being and self-regulation as we move towards the idea of what can we do when we feel afraid. And as I analyzed kind of the conversations they were having about the haunted house as I captured this documentation, for me what emerged was the students were really interested in exploring this concept of fear in a safe way, because, you know, for me, it's kind of the same as when you go to a scary movie. You know, there's almost some excitement to feeling afraid and feeling scared, but you know that, you know, you're in a safe place and nothing's going to jump out of the screen at you. So as students engaged in this haunted house play, I thought that's kind of the big idea here, is exploring the concept of fear, how it makes us feel, what we can do. And it's important to me in a play and inquiry piece to really look at the so what, the big piece, through the analysis of what's happening. The fourth stage of the inquiry process that we talk about is the idea of sharing learning. So communicating our findings, dialoguing, going further, but also reflecting on the process and reminding ourselves that we can go back and try things again. So for us, sharing learning meant welcoming students into our haunted house. You can see these images are more of the final product. So we used a darker fabric to make it darker inside. There was an exit they added in the middle. They said some students might be scared, so they pulled the shelves apart in the middle, and there was an exit halfway through. So there's the idea, too, that came out of being considerate of other feelings. It was the self-reg, the well-being piece that would really emerge. There's tickets for sale and some literacy there. Oh, this was neat. It's cut off in the image, but they created, this was a bed made out of blocks, and it was outside, and if people were too scared, they called it the cheer up crew. They would take you there and give you a book and a stuffed animal, which was really neat to see. You know, it became more than just playing in a haunted house. There was a lot of very real learning that was happening in their play, which is hopefully what we're all taking away from tonight's session. You know, the great deal of learning that happens as students play and inquire. So this is the reflection piece. We welcomed the students from the other two kindergarten classes in our school to come through it, and we talked about how that made us feel. So students remarked that they felt happy, they felt marvelous because we worked together. So this reflection piece was so important. Students indicated that they felt proud. They realized that we worked together to build this as a community. And this last piece here comes from Natural Curiosity. It's a resource I love and will be linked in our resources for sure. But it's just some thinking pieces around inquiry-based learning, because although most of our conversation tonight was play-based learning, like I said, to me, play-based and inquiry-based learning go hand in hand, especially in a kindergarten classroom. There's some things here that you can think about. The clip art has been great. Maybe we'll use that clip art again. I'd like you to just put a clip art beside one that really resonates with you tonight, one that kind of sparks your thinking. It's interesting to see that they're so spread around the circle. I like that. It speaks to the importance of this graphic, that all of these points around the circle really resonate with us. I put mine at the end point or final product is not known. It's that idea that I mentioned earlier, play gets messy, but also inquiry-based learning gets messy in the sense that we don't know where it's going. And often as teachers, we want that control, but the fun of it is when students take the lead, we don't know where they're going to take it, but we go along for the ride. Yeah, there's lots there by requires responsive and flexible teaching. That's awesome. I'm so happy that's resonating, because that's really crucial. like I said, this graphic comes from a resource that I love called Natural Curiosity, and I was actually just looking online. They've just released the second edition of it, and the second edition brings more of an Indigenous perspective, so it's something I'm hoping to get my hands on. I have the first edition, but I'll certainly be getting myself the second edition because I found that this resource has been really helpful in looking at play and inquiry in the early years. We're getting towards the end of the session. There'll be some time to maybe have some chats if there's thoughts outstanding, but we started with a minds-on quote, and I like to end with a quote. And this is actually my very favorite quote about teaching. I actually have it posted on our classroom door so that it's the first thing I see every morning and the last thing I see when I leave the classroom. It comes from Rachel Carson in The Sense of Wonder. And she says, "I should ask that a gift to each child in the world be a sense of wonder so indestructible that it lasts throughout life, as an unfailing antidote against the boredom and disenchantments of later years. If a child is to keep alive their inborn sense of wonder, they need the companionship of at least one adult who can share it, rediscovering with them the joy, excitement, and mystery of the world we live in." And that's just always been a piece that really resonates with me. I like to reread that one as we think about play-based learning and the role that we as teachers have in taking part for the play and advocating for the play. Both are very important. On this slide here, you'll see some of the resources that I mentioned tonight and ones that I've certainly found helpful in my own practice. And on the right of the screen is contact info for me if you're interested in connecting further and chatting kindergarten and early years. I am on Twitter at Joel Seaman, and I use that account to connect with other educators. It's been really meaningful and helpful to see what people from around the world are doing and to engage in those conversations and dialogue. Twitter has been such a great learning tool for me, so hopefully I will connect with some of you there. IPS Kindergarten is our classroom account. If you're interested in seeing what we're doing on the island, it's shared between 3 kindergarten classes. Anything with hashtag Room 109 is what we're up to, but it's all really great stuff if you're interested in taking a look. I also have a blog because, as you may have picked up, I do like to talk about kindergarten, and I thought it was just an interesting way to go deeper into documenting my own journey as an educator and as a lifelong learner who's thinking about play and inquiry in the early years. So some of the projects I referenced tonight, I actually have blog posts on if you're interested in learning more about that. That is more or less it for me. We're ending a little bit early tonight, but perhaps we'll have some more conversations in the chat if there's more questions. But before that, I just want to thank all of you for coming out tonight. And I'd like to thank Mally for being here as the moderator and helping me out all along the way. I think it was a great session. Hopefully you all thought that too. It was nice to see so many voices taking part in the dialogue. Like I said off the top, I really didn't want it to be only my voice. You guys all are knowledgeable in the field as well and gave me some really interesting thinking points and ideas. So I want to thank you all again for being here. Hopefully you found it helpful, and hopefully I will see you again at another OTS Connects webinar.
Thanks, Jill. That was really great. I love the quote that you ended with as well. And thanks for everyone for your great participation. As Jill said, it really makes the hour and a half go very quickly, and lots of things to talk about. So as Joel mentioned, it would be great to have your feedback on the session, and there's 3 ways that you can provide feedback. The first one is by simply clicking on the link that's in the on the slide. It's the only live link in the whole presentation, and it will take you directly to a survey. The second one is by clicking on the link in the chat box, and it will take you to the feedback survey. And the third one is when you log out of the room, it will take you actually directly to the survey so that you could hopefully fill that out. And that provides us, 3 ways of giving feedback to Joel and to OTF Connects and also to the ministry who funds all of the programs. And once you've done that, if you could, it will direct you to a link that you could download a certificate for your professional portfolio. The next thing is there are many more sessions that are going to be happening between now and the end of May. And if you could go to the OTF Connects calendar and see the whole variety of programs that are coming up. Do you have any more coming up, Joel?
I do. I have one in May